Hey guys, welcome back into our Python programming series. We kind of discussed about how to really install and go from there. So let's get on to some of the hands-on going forward into this series. On my left-hand side of the screen, again, I'm referring to W3 School, if you recall from the previous sessions, just to keep things in check where we are and what are the topics that we need to cover. And on the right-hand side, I have opened a command prompt. I have moved to a specific directory just to keep our files organized pretty much. So now let's go ahead and start working with the Python. So before we really start writing bigger programming of lines of code or start making use of IDE, I wanted to go through some of the basic stuff, put things in the check, and then really build on top of that. So without any further delay, let's get it started. So if you take a look at here on the Python getting started, once the Python is installed, if you need to check on this machine if you have a Python, and if it indeed that's the machine, what is the version of the Python, you could go ahead and type the command python hyphen version. So that would reveal you the current version of the Python being installed on this machine. So we can go ahead and simply do that. So in our case, it says, okay, hey, the Python version you are running on this machine is 3.7.1. That's pretty good. That was the version, if you recall, we had installed. And again, if you go through, it talks about some of the Python quick start, but we will go ahead and learn how do you really create these Python files, how do you really go ahead and type these different keywords. In this case, it says printf, and some of the other things. So now let's go ahead and take a look at, this is what we will be working initially to start off, this Python command line, or sometime called as a Python interactive shell or Python interpreter. So just to simply launch this Python command line or the interpreter or the shell, you can just simply go ahead and type the command like it says Python. So now let's go ahead and type Python. And once you enter the Python, it kind of reiterates the same thing. Okay, hey, the version of Python you're running is 3.7.1. If you need any further information, you can always type the help article to see what are the different things. If I just simply go ahead and type help, it says, okay, help is a function. So we can take a look at anything that I want to take a look. Let's say I want to say, okay, here I want to get some information on the exit. So it would try to get you from the documentation, what are the details available on the system? How do you really, what are the things that you can do with the exit? And don't worry, we will explore some of these things as we progress in this series. So very first thing it says, okay, hey, let's write a hello world program. So hello world is nothing but a string that the Python is printing. So to print anything, if you have worked with some other programming language like PerSE, C++, you have something called like printf thing there. So there is a similar syntax in the Python exists, which is called print. So you could use the print opening parentheses and then the quotation mark or single quote, double quote, and then you can simply pass any message, any string, any numbers that you want to print on the screen, and Python would just simply go ahead and do that. If you want to just try, let's go ahead and try, say, okay, hey, print, welcome to Python programming series, and then let's just close it. And once you hit that, Python just simply went and, okay, hey, we are telling Python, use the print command or the print function, and within the print function, we are passing a string, just so Python will just go ahead and simply print that string. So right now, if you see whatever the commands that you are typing on the Python command line or Python interactive shell. So if you need to again print this message, you would have to just simply repeat the same line again. So for that, you can go ahead and simply press up arrow, repeat the command, and you can go ahead and do that. So that's wonderful. These are some of the things. And again, last but not the least function, which is the exit. If you want to come out from the Python command line or Python shell, you can go ahead and make use of the exit function. So simply go ahead and type the exit function and you will be thrown back to your command prompt. If you're on Windows, it'll be a command prompt. If it's a Linux, it will come out to your Linux shell. If you need to go inside again, you can go ahead and make use of the Python and you can go ahead and start using some of the things. So that's kind of the basic introduction, okay, hey, how do you really start the Python interactive shell? How can you use make use of the help function? How can you use the print? And how do you really exit out of the command shell? So now let's move on to the next section here. So Python syntax, if you see the print statement that we wrote, it's nothing but a syntax. So every programming language has its own way of writing certain things, which is called its syntax. How do you rewrite some of the things? And in the Python, we'll be making use of something called like indentation. If I compare the indentation in like C++, whenever you write a piece of code, you will probably like put a curly brackets around your code that kind of indicates, okay, hey, this is the beginning of the code that I want this code to be a block together. So we have the similar concept of indentation here, and we will be going through some of these things as we continue progress. So if you need to, when you are writing a program, if you need to put a comment into your program, you can make use of the hash character or the number sign, and you can put that in front of any line. That line becomes a comment line. So that's what it says. Okay, hey, the comment starts with a pound symbol, number symbol, or the hash symbol, whatever you want to call. And the Python will just simply treat, okay, hey, this is a comment, and it will not go ahead and do anything. It'll just move on. Docstring, let's say if you're writing a program and you want to make sure you provide enough information if somebody wants to take a look at your program. So you can go ahead and add quite a bit of text using something called docstring. So to type a docstring, you just put like 3 double quotation mark, then you go ahead and put your message or the information you want to go ahead and do that. And once you're done, you can again go ahead and close that with the same 3 quotation marks. So docstring, like it says, docstrings can be a one line or multiple line. In this case, the docstring is multiple lines, and then you can simply go ahead and write any further piece of the code. Again, think of a docstring just like a more of a comment, but it's like a multi-line comment. You would really use this to describe or provide more details about your program. Hey, the program, what is the purpose of this program if somebody takes a look or something. And again, when are we going through some of these things, I would again highly encourage you to go ahead and do these exercises. Okay, let's move on to the next section here. So now we'll talk about something called Python variable. Just like any other programming language, if you want to make use of the variables, Python also has different type of variables. But before we go into creating variables, let's take a different, the way you can define a variables or some of the conditions. So we'll talk about the variable names. A variable name have a short name. Usually a lot of things are similar to other programming language. You can use XYZ or you can use any name. And again, it says, okay, hey, variable name must start with a letter or the underscore character. So that means you cannot have a variable something like number 1 underscore name. That would be an invalid variable. And it clearly says, okay, hey, a variable name cannot start with a number. A variable name can only contain alphanumeric. That means you cannot do any special characters or anything. Variable names are again case sensitive, as it clearly says, okay, hey, this age is different from this age is different from this age, because all these 3 variables are different because Python is case sensitive. So these are some of the things we need to keep in mind while we are working with the variables. There are a few good things about Python that I kind of like when it comes to comparing to the different programming language. So in this case, if you see, we are creating a variable where we say, okay, hey, x is equals to 5. And next we say x, we are creating another variable y where we are storing hello. So now let's say if you want to print the values of x and y, I can make use of again the print function. And within the print function, I can pass the variable name x or y. So let's go ahead and pass the variable x and then simply go ahead and press enter. And you can say Python will see, okay, hey, the x is a variable and we'll go ahead and print the value of that variable. In this case, it's 5. So now let's repeat the same thing for y. So it'll say, okay, hey, the y is another variable that is storing hello, which is nothing but a string. If you have worked with any other programming language, if you recall, okay, so just like any other programming language, if you're working with, let's say, C++, if you need to work with numbers, you will need to declare that as integer or a float variable. So you will need to tell in advance, okay, hey, the type of the variable that I'm working with, it's an integer, it's a float, or it's a string. But that's not the case with the Python. Python is very flexible and you don't have to tell in advance, okay, hey, the type of variable that I'm working with, it's a number, it's an integer, or it's a string. So if you take an example here, we had just declared a variable x is equals to 5. So 5 in this case is an integer number, so we are storing number 5 inside the variable x. So now I can go ahead and change it to something called Python. So Python will not complain, okay, it will not say, okay, hey, this variable x had a previous value of integer, why are you now assigning a string? That's not the case with any other programming language. Like I said earlier, if you're working with C or C++, if you define a variable as being integer, you cannot go ahead and store a string into that variable. So that way Python is kind of very flexible. So now if I go ahead and use the print, and within the print if I pass x, it would return me the something called, okay, hey, the x now contains the Python. Again, there are different type of variables within the Python. If you need to find out the type of the variable, you could always use something called the type function, and within the type function you can pass your variable. So let's find out the type of what type of variable is x. So it says, okay, hey, the variable x is of type str. Str is nothing but your string. Similarly, we had defined earlier a variable y, so we can check the similar stuff for y. Y is also a string type variable. Now I'm going to go ahead and assign x is equals to 5. And if we repeat the same thing, it says, okay, hey, now the x is of type integer. If I go ahead and repeat the same thing, let's say here, x is equals to 5.30. Now let's go ahead and check that one. So it says, okay, hey, the variable x is of type float, and we had, so that means on the fly you can go ahead and create any kind of variable. You don't have to define in advance, okay, hey, the variable that I intend to use, it's an integer variable, it's a float variable, or it's a string variable. And again, if you're not sure what kind of variable are you working with, you can always make use of the type function to figure out the type of the variable that you're working. And again, this we kind of pretty much went through some of the variable names. And just to reiterate one more time, you can make use of the print statement or print function to print the value of a variable. There is another good use in there here in this on left hand side. They're showing the make use of the plus. So the plus, if you look from the mathematical perspective, plus is kind of a addition of two numbers if you're working with two numbers. But in this case, if we take on the left hand side, x is equals to awesome. That means the x is of a variable of type string here. Yes, you guessed it right. So now if you see in the print function, we are passing Python within the double quotation mark. So that means it's also a string. So when you do a print one string and then use the plus operator with another string, that means you are using the concatenations. You are concatenating both the string. So let's go ahead and try this out here. So I'll go ahead and say here Python, and now we can make use of the hello. We can use the plus, and then I can use the variable x. And now when I go ahead and enter, it says hello concatenate a variable x. X has a value of Python, so it's printing hello Python. So in this case, you can also use the plus character to add a variable to another variable. So in this case, we had one variable and one string. You could work with two variables. So let's say we had x, we can say y is equals to now this time hello. And we can just simply say print y plus x. And it would do the same thing, hello Python. So that means the plus operator can be used on a string. If you're using the plus operator on a string, that means you're concatenating the two strings. If you're working with the numbers, so if I go ahead and say I is equals to 10 and j is equals to 20, we can just say simply print I plus j here. So I'll go ahead and do 30. So in this case, it's doing the mathematical plus operator, which is doing the addition of the two numbers. If you're working with the string, it's doing the concatenation of the strings. So these are some of the pretty good things about the Python. The operators are pretty flexible. So again, if you take an example on the left hand side, we have two variables, x equals to 5 and y equals to 10. We're just simply doing a print x plus y. So that means these two are of the type integer. And again, if you're not sure, we just discussed you can make use of the type function to figure out the type of the variables. So if I need to check again, I can make use of the type. Hey, what is the type of variable is I? It says, okay, I is integer. That's why when we said I plus j, the plus here worked as a mathematical operator. But when we worked on x plus y, it was concatenation because x and y were of the string type. So if we scroll down further, again, yep, that's a very good example. If you see in this case, we are defining x is equals to 5 and y equals to John. So if I ask you, hey, what is the type of variable is x? Yes, you guessed it right. It's an integer. And how about y? String. Yeah, you're right. So now if you see in this example, we are trying to concatenate a number with a string. So that's not allowed. So Python will give us a type error. So let me just show you. Remember, we had a variable x here and we had a variable I here. So if I try to do something like this, x plus I, Python would simply give you an indicator saying, okay, hey, can only concatenate string, not integer. So it clearly says, okay, hey, because x is a string, so you cannot concatenate a string with an integer. If let's try something else, if I go ahead and do I plus x, again it says unsupported operand type for plus integer and string. So depending on who comes first, if you put a string first, it would say, okay, hey, the type error is because you are trying to concatenate string with a number. But if you put a number first and then the string, then it would say, okay, hey, unsupported operand type, because it was hoping the first number is integer and the second number is string. It's not allowed and you cannot do that. We will be making use of some of the functions. So we will be learning about these functions called int, float, and there is something called string. So if in this case, if you look at our first error where we were trying to do x plus I, where x is in string, y is an integer. But let's say we want to concatenate. So in that case, we need to convert variable I from integer to a string. And for that conversion, we can make use of these str functions. And if we need to do reverse for some of the other things, we can make use of the float or the integer function. So now let's go ahead and repeat this thing, but now this time we'll be making use of the str. So print x, which is our string. Now we had an I earlier, but now this time I want to convert this I, which is an integer, to a string. So we can make use of the str function. And now let's go ahead and do that. And Python says, okay, hey, Python 10. There is no, they are kind of together because there was no space. If you want to put a space, you could do a single double quote mark and an empty space or a string between these two variables. So we'll go ahead and do some similar thing for you here. So if I go ahead and define something like this, I'll call it z is equals to 20. Now, can any of you guess me what is the type of variable z? If you guessed at string, then it's correct. And if you guessed at integer, that's wrong. Because in this case, even though it's a number, but this number is surrounded by the quotation mark, that kind of indicates, okay, hey, the variable that you have defined is of string type. And again, if you're ever in doubt, you can always make use of the type function. So I'll go to the type and let me figure out the type of z is. So it's okay, hey, z is of string type. So in this case, if I go ahead and try something like this, I plus z, it would give me an error again because, okay, hey, I was integer while z is a string. But if you see, even though this z is a string, but this is a number. So let's say I want to convert this string into an integer or a float, means I want to have this 20 to be treated as numbers, not as a string. We can go ahead and make use of the integer or float function, whatever you want to do. So in that case, we are saying, okay, hey, the z, which is a string type of variable, convert this into an integer. So that means now this string 20 will become number 20. So we are trying to add number 20 with another integer in this case. So if I go ahead and do that, it will let me do that. So now we have the result being 30 because I had a value of 10. So you can keep these functions handy, integer, float, string, to convert from one type to the another type. To find the type of variable, you can always make use of the type variable. You can define different type of variables. Again, we discussed integer, string, float. These are some of the numbers you can work with. And again, I would highly encourage you to work through some of these exercises. Thank you, and I will see you in the next episode of the series.